Chapter 122. We sat down at the computer, OJ on my left and AC on my right. "The thing you gotta remember," OJ said, "is that we're the good guys. Even though it might not seem like it sometimes, everything we're doing is for the greater good of mankind." His voice has really changed again, hasn't it? AC nodded emphatically along with him. "Sure," OJ continued. "You take things individually, on a small time frame, it seems like bad things happen, and there's no justice in the world. But when you see the bigger picture, I'm talking the God's eye view, the view stretched over billions of years, then you realize that bad things always lead to good things, and that there's a purpose for everything under the sun. The law of karma is perfect. What goes around comes around, and what you do unto others will be done unto you one day for the purpose of your evolution, if not necessarily in this lifetime. But without an understanding of that, life can appear confusing." "Take Hitler," said AC. "You see him..." How does he talk? Doesn't matter. "You see him there in our Hall of Fame, and you think, what's that guy doing here? But we told you earlier, a dude like him doesn't come from nowhere. He represents the mind of his people and the nation, the collective consciousness. Maybe not what they're expressing on the surface, but what's going on deep down for sure. They even get voted into power, these people, because enough minds and bodies want them. You mark my words, any thinking person is going to look back at Trump as one of the worst presidents the world has ever seen. But even then, he serves his purpose. He represents the country as it actually is, not as certain people hope it is, or pretend it is, or wish it was. And though it will look worse in the short term, when you look back in 50 or 100 or 1,000 years, you'll clearly see what a pivotal role his presidency is going to play in human evolution and progress. You guys over in Europe," OJ said, "you was fighting wars for hundreds if not thousands of years. Anybody who's truly tasted war knows what a dumb and horrible thing it is. But for some reason you wouldn't stop, not even after the horrors of World War I. Then Hitler came along and gave you a war so terrible you never wanted another one again. And within a few decades, instead of smashing each other with tanks and bombs and landmines and lances, you're all just sitting on beaches together and playing soccer. Now you couldn't imagine a war between the UK and France, between Germany and the Netherlands. But not so long ago, people couldn't imagine not having a war. And that was just one of the gifts the being you call Hitler brought to you." "If you've read the Bible," AC said, forcing my head to switch sides once again, like I was watching some slow-motion tennis match, "you'll remember that Jesus said he came not to bring peace, but to bring a sword, to split families down the middle, to turn father against son." "Oh, the polarizing effect you were talking about," I said, eager to get a word in and show that I knew at least a little more than zero. "Right," said OJ, compelling my head back to the left. "That's the irony so many people miss. They call Jesus the Prince of Peace, and yet he said it himself in plain English that wasn't why he came, and history has proved it. And Hitler is reviled for the horrors he brought, and yet he did more for peace in Europe than anybody." I nodded and tried to think of an argument. But apart from pointing out that Jesus didn't speak English, I couldn't think of anything. And that one just seemed petty and likely to lead us down some daft and pointless tangent. "You just have to see it from a bigger perspective," said AC over my right shoulder. I just listened and looked down at the keyboard. Enough with this ping-ponging my eyes all over the place. I was sold. "Okay," I said. "So you guys are the good guys. Seems more or less reasonable. But in that case, who are the bad guys? And are they the ones who have the third computer?" OJ closed his eyes and clasped his hands together in front of his face. He nodded his head, not in agreement with anything, but as a man contemplating a truth he was struggling to accept and pondering words he didn't want to say. "The bad guys," he said. "The bad guys, well, you can see it in their eyes. in the fury and hatred they bring to the world, in the way they mislead people, not for the greater good, but for their own nefarious purpose. And then even more so in the way they work behind the scenes, with the long game in mind, much like we do, except with a whole different reason and goal. Yes, said AC, they have the third computer. But no, we can't tell you who they are, not here, not knowing that you're going to publish these words, whether we want you to or not. The time for revealing their names to the world isn't yet. The two of them were as solemn as I'd ever seen them, and even though I was dying to know who at least a few of the baddies were, I understood that they had their reasons for not telling me. It was very clear from their tones that what they were saying about the time not being right was true. And yet, having been given so much information, it was frustrating to be kept in the dark over this, and that frustration bubbled over. Alex Jones, I said. He must be one. That guy's as fruity and batshit crazy as they come. I looked in turn to each one, a couple of times each, but their lips were sealed. What about Glenn Beck, I said. I've always known there was something evil and twisted about that guy. You can see it in his eyes, in the fakeness of his smile. That dude's got paedophile written all over him. I checked them out again, 3 glances at OJ and just a couple at AC, having realized they're giving me nada. Okay then, I said. Those dodgy Christian televangelists, they're for sure working for the Antichrist. If you're talking about people who have nastiness written on their faces, who mislead others in the most awful ways, who line their own pockets while their followers suffer terribly, nobody fits the bill better than them. If you can't give me any names, you could at least tell me whether some among their number are doing the fake preacher, money-grabbing, evil thing. I glanced at OJ, as unflinching as ever. But is that a slight smile on AC's face, a twinkle in his eye? I think it is. I stare at him hard and refuse to break the silence, and after what feels like an eternity, but is actually only 12 to 15 seconds, he gives me a sly wink. "What was that?" OJ said to him. "What was what?" AC said, feigning innocence. "You didn't just wink," OJ said. "I swear I saw you wink." "Not me," AC said. "I didn't see anything," I concurred. "Though if you're saying you thought you saw him wink then, even though he didn't, maybe that's you confirming that I was right about the televangelists." "Aha," I said. "You were projecting your confirmation onto AC's non-existent wink." "No," said OJ, somewhat flustered for the first time in a long time. And now I look back, I realize I didn't see him wink at all. I was just making a joke. Yeah, that's right. And you fell for it once more, Limey. Oh boy, how many more times we gonna get you? Right, AC, old buddy?" AC nodded, and I sat back satisfied in my chair. I don't think a one of us believed the narrative OJ had tried to spin, but there was no sense in naming and shaming, not right then. "Listen," said OJ. "If I give you one name, will you stop this guessing game and be happy and let us move on? A very high-up dude, one of the biggest and baddest of the bad cheeses. Very close to the main man himself." "Oh, for sure," I said, "as long as you'll let me include it in the book." AC looked at OJ with an expression that said, "What are you doing, man? Are you sure about this?" But OJ seemed at ease. "It's fine," he said. "Not a problem. Is it Kenneth Copeland?" I said. "That guy's got to be working for the dark side." "Limey," said OJ, "do you want this name or not?" "Want it," I said. "Colin Dent," he said, simply. "Who?" I said. "Never heard of him." AC's face broke into a smile and he laughed. "Ah, true," he said, looking adoringly at OJ. "One thing you got to learn, Limey. Not every high-stakes player in the game is someone in the public eye. They could be someone just like you, some unknown, some normal dude, some nobody living a normal, quiet life somewhere, biding their time. Just like Colin. He's a nice fella on the surface of things, liked by his friends, pleasant to his neighbors. But he's a man with a soul as black as night, if you could call him a man, and if you could call it a soul." O.J. visibly shuddered and shook his head. "Even to come within 20 feet of that guy and the ones like him," he said, obviously reliving some awful experience, "is enough to make you want to run crying to your mummy and wishing you could climb back into her womb, all safe and warm and ignorant of the things of this world." He shook his head again, and I saw a few tears come to his eyes. He closed them and composed himself, steadied his breath and rubbed his chest for 9 or 10 seconds, then snapped his eyes open and readied once more for business. "So," he said, "where were we?" "Probably time to introduce Cute Limey to Q," AC said, shuffling the mouse and bringing the screen back to life. It looked much like any normal desktop. I couldn't see anything immediately special about the computer. "You heard of the Mandela effect?" O.J. said, leaning over me and entering a series of passwords while I answered. "Sure," I said. "I was just thinking about that. That's where you contemplate how you're really at the center of a mandala, and the root of everything you perceive by way of any of your senses can be traced to a source deep within your own being. I've heard of it, but I was never able to do it, not really. It's more of a monk thing, I think, or maybe just some made-up bit of New Age nonsense." "No, not mandala," said AC. "Mandela. The Mandela effect." "Oh," I said, about to say something about their accents. "I thought you said mandala, like those patterns Buddhists draw in sand. But the Mandela effect," O.J. repeated, a little more clearly this time. "The idea that some people remember events from the past differently to how they're currently recorded and presented. So named because it first came to the attention of a few nutjobs who swore blind that Nelson Mandela died in the mid-1980s in prison." "Well, that's silly," I said. "I remember watching the TV when he got out in something like 1990, and when he presented the Rugby World Cup to the South African captain in about 1995. I also remember the concert for Mandela at Wembley, Terence Trent D'Arby and Simple Minds played. There were millions of people who saw that. So I think they'd have noticed if some dead dude had got up on stage and given a big speech to the crowd." "Exactly," said AC. "They're wrong about Mandela, just as they're wrong about most of the things they think have been changed from one timeline to the next. Most of it's just silly lines from movies they're misremembering. The one from The Empire Strikes Back is the most famous one, but 'Luke, I am your father,' I said in what, even if I do say so myself, was not a very good James Earl Jones impression." "Right," said AC. "A lot of people are convinced that's what it was originally, but it's a matter of ease to explain why they would think that." "Like that famous Crocodile Dundee knife line," O.J. interjected. "You call that a knife? This is a knife." These Mandela effect people are convinced that's what it was. And now when they check it over and see it's actually, "That's not a knife, that's a knife," and they think it's been altered. But really it's just because they probably only saw the movie like once, 20 or 30 years ago, while they've been hearing other people misquote the line dozens and dozens of times in the years since, including in 2 different episodes of my namesakes, The Simpsons. And their memories of the 2 things, the clear picture of Paul Hogan smiling under his hat and pulling out his blade, and then Uncle Bob repeating it over and over at some family barbecue in an Australian accent even worse than the one I just tried. They've become mingled. "But here's the surprising thing," said AC, returning to a somber tone. "They're not wrong about everything. Some of the things they think have been changed, and the theory as a whole has some merit. There are people out there who remember things differently to the masses, and both sets of memories are correct." They went quiet for a moment to let this sink in. "This computer here," said O.J., leaning over me once more and re-entering the last set of passwords due to his previous login having timed out, "allows us to surf the web for all the timelines of all the world. You can go to YouTube and watch a clip of something that didn't happen in your timeline, but did happen in the timeline of another. Hell, you can go on this computer and find a timeline where there is no YouTube, where Alta Vista is bigger than Google, where Nelson Mandela lived to 104. It's all there." I pondered this for a moment, and for about the first time in the whole adventure, I felt a real overwhelming, gleeful and giddy sense of excitement enter my being. My eyes grew wide. My hand reached automatically for the mouse. My mouth watered at the prospect of God only knows how many different versions of the entire internet I could peruse. What would I see there? What football results? What comedy shows? What posts of my own that I had no memory of writing? What, even, if I came across Facebook profiles belonging to other versions of me who were married with children, or wearing shirt and tie, or fat and even more rubbish at life than I was? Not to mention, I suppose, all the alternate world histories and events and different directions life could have taken had Hitler been assassinated in the early 30s, or Lincoln not be taken out that night in the theatre, or had a different one of Donald Trump's father's sperms penetrated his mother's egg. Maybe there was a timeline where Donald Bradman didn't get bowled for a duck in his last innings and retired with an average of 100, or one where the referees spotted Diego Maradona's goddamn handball in the '86 World Cup and England weren't robbed. Maybe even one where I'd actually done something wonderful with my life, though I suppose that might have just depressed me, reading all about the smug bastard and the myriad ways he would be better than me. "We know what you're thinking," said AC, moving the mouse away from my hand, "and it's not time for that. Why, you've got to understand that it's all very much like that old philosopher's thought experiment, where a tram is hurtling towards a bunch of people, and you got to decide whether to pull a lever and save a crowd of 10 it's about to plow into, or direct it into the path of a mother pushing her baby and risk killing the baby." "Kill the baby," I said, "obviously. 10 lives outweigh 1, and since it's a baby, it hasn't had time to do anything yet. She can just have another one. It's no great loss." AC and OJ stared at one another, eyes open wide. I figured they were thinking I was one heartless motherfucker. Who would kill a baby so quick as that, without at least a little bit of remorse and dilemma? "I'm kidding," I said. "It's just that I've played this game before. I know how it goes. The baby's like some savior of mankind, and one of the 10 in the crowd is a murderous despot destined to ruin the country. But then I say, well, kill the despot, and you say, the despot gets rid of a guy even worse than him, and the baby savior ends up having a religion found in his name, and the followers of that religion go on terrible rampages across the globe trying to convert others to their way of life, which has now become miserable and dogmatic, and end up killing millions upon millions in their savior's name, and making things even worse than either of the despots would have done, and so on." "Right," said OJ. "And the thing is," he said, "it's absolutely true." Chapter 123. "We're gonna let you have a little look around here," said OJ, indicating the computer and, I presumed, the meta web. "But it can only ever be a little look, because there's much on here that simply wouldn't be good for you to know." "Is there a timeline where Maggie Thatcher did some nude modelling?" I blurted out, unable to stop myself. AC reached over and typed a few words, and, with a few clicks, we were on a Google image search page. "Nice," I said, nodding in approval. "That's your bonus price," said OJ. "But now it's time for business, and could we not just see one where Maradona's handball got disallowed, please? I'd love to know how that game would have gone if the ref had actually seen that. As if he could outjump Peter Shilton and—" "That was the hand of God," AC smiled. "Ain't no getting around that one. Though there are timelines where England didn't make it out of the group stage, and he did it against Poland or Morocco or Portugal instead." Well, that was depressing. Not even in an infinite universe with an infinite number of monkeys writing the script could England have beaten the dirty cheating Argies in that Mexico City stadium with the weird giant spider's shadow on the pitch. My boyhood tears and life-defining sense of injustice were written in stone. Even the rich and suave versions of me couldn't escape that. "What about in 1990, I said. Were there timelines where England won the shootout against Germany and went on to lift the cup?" "You're asking a lot there," said AC. "But yeah, there are a small number of timelines where England actually scored more penalties than Germany. And in all but one of them, they went on to beat Argentina fairly easily in the final." He leaned over. Click, click, click. And there I was, staring at newspaper images of Gary Lineker and Bobby Robson holding the Jules Rimet aloft, sweaty and glad, eyes beaming with the joy of a temporary but unforgettable moment of inexpressible glory. Several more clicks. Images of headlines declaring Paul Gascoigne dead from a drug overdose, aged 25. Bobby Robson immediately retires, sickened to his soul. Gary Lineker becomes an alcoholic and never advertises crisps or presents match of the day or tweets. Click, click, click. Alan Shearer's career prematurely ended, injured in a cycling accident. Newcastle relegated to Division 3 and soon after declared bankrupt and disbanded. Click, click, click. The north of England declares independence. Civil war in the UK. 4 million dead and Scotland rendered even more of a toxic wasteland. 50 years of poverty and desperation then follow, and the population is reduced to just 20 million. And then a plague starts that spreads to the rest of the world. And then, all from a penalty shootout, I said. They nodded solemnly. Believe it or not, said OJ, from all of the possible timelines available to us, with constant monitoring and refinement, this current timeline is the best we can find. I know. You'll say the world isn't perfect, and surely it could be a lot better than this. But if you'd seen the bigger picture as we have, and you just got a tiny glimpse, you'd understand and nod your head and agree. This is really the best we can do, I said, convinced that somewhere there had to be a world where humans had made the choice not to continually slaughter one another or stand idly by while thousands of children starved to death, a mere plane journey from countries who paid people to throw food away. There are timelines that are equivalent to this one, OJ said, but none you could say are significantly better. And very few where the three of us are standing here looking at this computer and having this conversation. In some, you never existed. In some, your life is 1,000 times worse than it is now, if you can imagine that. So my advice is to be grateful for the moment that you're actually living, not to worry too much about what might have been, because you never know what a thing will lead to. Bad things lead to good, and good things lead to bad. Hopefully that's clear enough by now. The main thing is not to worry about it. This is what we want to show you, said AC. But first, a question. Can you remember who played in midfield for Everton in the 1984 FA Cup final? I just closed my eyes and shook my head and laughed. Oh, you motherfuckers, I said. How the hell did you know about that? I looked at each of them in turn, expecting to see big stupid gotcha grins plastered across their faces, but nothing. Just expectant eyes waiting for me to say something, as though the question they'd just asked wasn't completely and utterly designed to mess with my mind. So here's the truth. Back when I was a kid, I was a huge Everton fan, and the first match I'd watched on TV was the '84 Cup final against Watford. I had all the stickers, I had all the stats, and as small boys often do, I wrote it all down in exercise books and read it over and over until I knew the whole thing off by heart. Even as an adult, there were few things I could repeat so easily as the 1984 FA Cup final lineup. And yet, for some weird reason, it was always a thought and a memory that was tinged with embarrassment and pain. For back when I was a boy, I'd got it in my head that the midfield three went Reed, Stevens, Collins. I remembered the whole 11 better than I remembered most of my girlfriends. But as the records and every other person's memory shows, there never was a player called Simon Collins, and it was Kevin Richardson who played for Everton at number 11 that day. There were times when I thought I'd gone mad. I could see his face. I could see the way he ran, with his hand held slightly out to the side. He had ginger hair. He set up the opening goal. The image of his freckles and his goofy grin as he celebrated with Andy Gray and Graham Sharp were burned into my retina and my mind. But the rest of the world said he'd never existed. And once my boyhood stubbornness had worn off and I'd learned about the fallibility of memory, I reluctantly persuaded myself to agree with them. I figured I'd just worked a screw loose somewhere along the way. A lot of people do, so why not me? AC put his hand on my shoulder. He was real, he said. In your timeline, he was real. And then things got shifted, And you were the only one who remembered him. Seriously, in a world of 7.5 billion people, there's not another soul on the planet who saw Simon Collins play for Everton against Watford on Saturday, May the 19th, 1984. I closed my eyes and held my head in my hands. I felt this extraordinary sadness wash over me, all the thoughts and feelings of being a boy whose friends laughed at him because he stamped his feet and swore blind it was Collins, not Richardson, who put the cross in that led to Graham Sharp's opener. They'd watched the game too, and they all knew for sure it wasn't. But how could I be so fucking wrong about something I'd seen with my own eyes? Not even my normally reliable granddad could back me up on this one. And so I'd learned to stuff it down and keep it as a weird, confusing secret, spoken to no one except the occasional lover, as an interesting anecdote on the vagaries of memory and youth, laughing at myself and my stupidity, even as a part of me stayed confused and convinced by what I'd seen as a child. I'd learned to tell myself that there was something seriously amiss with my mind cogs, and that I was somehow flawed and maybe even deranged and damaged. But there wasn't. It was merely the shifting of a timeline and a memory that had refused to shift with it. And with this confirmation there was a healing of old wounds and old pains and old shames and old confusion. The boy I once was finally validated in his foot-stamping frustration. All the tears he'd cried alone in his room, all the times he'd felt spurned and unsupported by those nearest and dearest to him. Yet there was no fault in them either, for their memories were as solid as his, and they had the backings of millions of others. It was just one of those things. How beautiful it was to receive this confirmation and healing, and finally, truth. AC and OJ stood silent as they let me go through my process, and then I spoke. I was really the only one, I said, the only one in the entire world. There was one other, AC said, who was sharing the same timeline, but she wasn't watching the game. Because you were, and because you had the experiences you had because of that, you grew up to be something of a unique individual. We've been watching you for many years. We've been following you, and even sometimes guiding you on your way. You're probably aware of some of that. You had a sense that there was some hidden power leading you in certain directions. And that was us. You wondered earlier if you were a chosen one, and in a sense you were. Chosen by us and chosen by the whims of fate, but also chosen by yourself and by your own soul. A choice that you made even before you knew what choice was. And here we are today. OJ leaned over and typed a few words in the search box. He hit the enter key, and we were taken to a Wikipedia page, but a Wikipedia page with a slightly different design to the one I was used to. This is from the net of the timeline you grew up in, until you were about 8.5, he said. Go ahead, type in his name. I trembled. How could it be that after all these years, and yes, I had Googled him before, there were a million Simon Collinses, and none of them had ever come close to playing for Everton? How could it be that I was about to see his stats, his face, his personal life details, and maybe even his death? And then an awful thought hit me. What if it was just OJ and AC fucking with me? What if I typed his name in the search box and got nothing but the same old results for Phil Collins' son and some completely different non-ginger footballer? And then I'd have to sit here for the 1000th time feeling dumb and feeling my blood boil, and I just didn't think I could take it again. Or what if there was a search result for him, and it was just some page they'd manufactured, nothing to do with reality? That would be easy to do. I could probably figure out how to do that myself, but, well, that wouldn't explain how they'd known about it in the first place. And then I realized, girlfriends, the 4 or 5 girls I'd shared that story with. They'd been in touch with one of them, hell, perhaps with all of them, and got the lowdown on every little thing I'd ever done, and it was all just some elaborate prank. What about OJ's TV show, Juiced, where he played hidden camera jokes on members of the public, like that Just for Laughs thing they show on aeroplanes, and the rubbish version of Beatles About? Could that really be what this whole thing was? A simple prank on an unsuspecting member of the public, secret cameras everywhere, and the sly dog host eagerly awaiting the moment where he leapt into action and revealed the ruse and hollered his catchphrase to the shrieking delight of his idiot audience and the embarrassment/relief of the victim. Was I, in a word, being juiced? It seemed unlikely. It seemed a prank far too elaborate and difficult to pull off to be real, going right back to that first strange phone call and the vision in the sky. But who knew what direction reality TV was heading in? Who knew what the unwashed masses wanted to feast on in their underpants and on their couches? Maybe this was it. The weeks-long unravelling of a man's mind, streamed live somewhere online, and me somehow kept from it, and the entire universe in on the whole thing, simply for shits and giggles. I stood up from the chair, woozy with the possibility of it all. I backed away, unsteady, the room spinning, immediately needing to sit back down. I sat on the floor with a bump, used my arms to steady myself, closed my eyes and wished I was back home in bed, or cuddled up with someone I could trust, or non-existent myself. And then I heard it, John Motson's Cup Final commentary, as fresh as it was when I was 8 years old. I can't remember what John Motson sounds like. Collins. Collins, he said. And here he is again. And the cross headed half away, and Stevens shot, and a goal for Everton by Graham Sharp. That's not how he sounds, but whatever. I opened my eyes. AC had located the clip on YouTube and was playing it on repeat. And there they were, Collins and Sharp and Grace celebrating as I'd always seen them. Their terrible 80s hair and shorts, Collins' goofy grin, the freckles I'd searched long and hard for, the ginger eyebrows I'd completely forgotten but gazed lovingly upon once more. The cross comes in. It's cleared as far as Trevor Stephen. His scuffed shot falls to the feet of Graham Sharp, and Sharp wallops it into the back of the net, and it's 1-0 to Everton. And I'm right back there on my granddad's sofa, my skinny little boy arms in the air, an untainted and innocent child of 8, ecstatic and happy in a world that is nothing but goodness. Oh, how very, very nice.